Well, hello everybody and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DaCosta and this is Consistent Preterism. It's great to have you. It's Wednesday out there, everybody, and it's a scorcher. Got this heat wave rolling through here. Feel like we're living in hell. Anyways, I wanted to just come to you with a quick offering just to kind of set the record straight. Before I did that, I wanted to make a few remarks about yesterday's video, which was well received, when I did my rant about why I hate debating Christians, specifically futurist Christians, which includes partial preterist Christians. And of course, I, like a bait would attract an animal or a fish. I attracted a couple of wannabes, of course. And one was a partial preterist named Drew Johnson, I believe his name was. Now, sometimes I go over the arguments and present them and, and just kind of critique them and everything. But this guy's viewpoint was so diluted and so warped and so it made so little sense that it's best off not repeating, because it actually hurts the brain to repeat views sometimes. And so this fell into that category of, what the F are you talking about, dude? Basically, in a nutshell, Drew is a partial preterist, which I was for about 3 weeks until I got a grip on life and realized I was being completely inconsistent with everything. But I tried to show Drew, and Drew, he's got all these theories about how the last days was only like the judgment of Judah. Like he goes to Hosea 12 to prove it's about the judgment of Judah. I mean, these guys they're just incredibly random with their interpretations. And, of course, he doesn't understand that this is actually the gathering in of Ephraim's descendants, who were predicted and promised to become a multitude or a fullness of nations. The very thing that Paul said he was gathering in so that he could complete the task of all Israel saved in Romans 11. He doesn't understand that Paul is using Israel's Old Testament prophetic promise texts to answer questions like Romans 9, is God having mercy upon the Gentiles? And then he proceeds to quote passages, one being Hosea about the northern kingdom of Ephraim and how they would become not my people, but God would restore them. He doesn't understand how Moses made the prediction that in the latter days the Israelites would be paganized, not worshiping God, not circumcised, living, worshiping wood and stone, idols, the work of men's hands, but they would turn and God would have mercy upon them and remember the covenant that he made with their fathers. So he's extremely lost, but he likes to use Revelation 20, like I talked about yesterday. Revelation 20 is his safe haven, right? The most confusing, the most debated, the most challenging, metaphorical, symbolism-filled chapter in all of the Bible. That's where Drew Johnson likes to go to, prove concrete theories about the Bible, right? It makes no sense, right? He ignores everything else that we show him, and he goes to this place and says, no, look, here's the actual order. But if you look at the rest of the New Testament, the things that actually are not very symbolic and just plain black and white English, you can see that they are indeed very clear that this ended at the coming of the Lord. And that's what I kept trying to tell this guy. It's like, dude, you can say whatever you want to say, but if you look at what is being said in the New Testament, there is one soon-to-come final judgment according to works. That's it. There's not two, there's not three, there's not one now, one later. No, there's one at the end, and it coincides and correlates to a couple of things. This cluster of events took place at the very end, and however you want to put it in order, that's fine. However you want to argue about, oh, this had to happen here or there, that's fine. But just be certain that this cluster of events took place at the same time in the narrative. It doesn't tell you when. It doesn't care about when, because, again, it's an ideal story, so it's not concerned with the fine details like these bozos believe it is. But what happens is the cluster of events is very simply, it's the coming of the Lord, it's the fiery judgment of Old Covenant Jerusalem, It's the final great white throne judgment where the books are opened, and it's the entrance into the New Jerusalem, right? Those four things, the coming, the destruction of Old Jerusalem, the judgment according to works and the books being opened, and the entrance into the New Jerusalem, all take place at the same time. And I tried showing this bozo this, and he just didn't want to hear it. He said, no, I believe Jesus came. I'm a partial preterist, but I don't know when the final judgment's going to take place or where it will take place, or, that's his argument. So, again, folks, there is no two comings of Jesus. There are no two destructions of Old Covenant Jerusalem. There are no two great final judgments where the books are open. And there are no two inheritances of the New Jerusalem, right? Those were all single events recorded in this narrative as happening one time and one time alone. And doesn't it just make perfect sense, like I say all the time, how when Old Covenant Jerusalem falls, they receive New Jerusalem? It's just very simple. It goes right off the tail end of Old Covenant Jerusalem, the mother of all harlots. And of course, we know this was a book, a story about the book of law. And of course, we see Paul saying things like, he's fulfilled the handwritten requirements of the law. He's nailed the law to his flesh or to the cross, blah, blah, blah. So we know it was all about the law and the book of law. And the judgment according to works were the works of the law. Okay, Paul says that very clearly in places like Romans 4. What did our father Abraham find according to his circumcision? For by the law no man is justified, or by his works no man will be justified. And then he goes on and he's talking about the law, circumcision, the commandments. Okay, so that's what it's all about. It's this constant, pullback between obeying the law and, faith. And that's what it is. But it doesn't extend outside of Israel. That's for damn sure. So I just wanted to say that these guys have no arguments. They're very delusional. And yeah, so we'll leave it at that without getting too deep in that. On another note, I do believe that I am going to be having a baby very soon. I just, when you just have the feeling and you just see the signs, it's the signs of the times. Like Drew Johnson would think it's the end times. I think my wife is at her last few days of pregnancy based on some things. So, this very well could be my last offering to you guys for, a couple of weeks. Who knows? I don't know. But that's how I feel. And so just be prepared. If I go dark on you, it's not because I gave up. It's not because I'm afraid of your arguments. They all accuse me of running when I don't feel like getting into a thumb war with them. They all have the same arguments. Oh, yeah, you can't defeat me. I came here and knocked your arguments out. No, asshole. I just prefer not to engage in a 4-hour-long thumb war when I have carpal tunnel in both hands right now. So that's really the bottom line. But I do it anyway because I care about you bozos. And I don't want you to think that you're playing spiritual Israelite kingdom all your life. I want you to get on with your life and live it. But anyway, so yeah, any moment now, your boy Jason could be, thrust into a delivery room and covered in flesh and blood. Anyway, speaking of flesh and blood, I want to do a little test. I want you to join in. We're going to have a little, what do they call it? Group participation test right here, okay? I want you to take the sharpest object that you have in your possession right now. Hopefully, maybe a machete, perhaps a chainsaw, maybe a 12-inch butcher knife, whatever you have. And I want you to stick it directly into your thigh. I want you to cut your thigh wide open, okay? I know it's probably going to sting a little bit, but just hack right into it for me, all right? I'm doing it with you, okay? I got a nice 12-inch blade right into my juicy thigh, okay? Now, I want you to look down, and I want you to see, do you see flesh and blood, okay? Do you see blood pouring out of your big old thigh there, okay? You do? Okay, cool. I do too, all right? So what that means in a nutshell, what that little test just proved is that you are not living in the kingdom of God right now. You are not in the kingdom of God right now. Plain and simple. There's no arguments. You cannot argue it. If you just hacked into your leg and found flesh and blood, you absolutely cannot be living in the kingdom of God right now. You cannot be part of it. And the reason why I had you cut off your leg this morning, folks, is there were a couple of boneheads, Drew Johnson being one of them. What the other guy's name is? Keith Rhodes, I think his name is. He's he comes on and he thinks he's very intelligent and full of biblical wisdom. He's the guy that told me that he's been studying the Bible a lot longer than me, so he might know a thing or two more than me. You know, that guy. He and Drew both made the extremely incorrect and punishing statement to me that they are both in the kingdom of God right now. I know Drew is a partial preterist because he admitted that. I'm assuming Keith Rhodes is also a partial preterist because he believes he's in the kingdom right now. Because most futurists, full-blown dispensationalists, waiting for Jesus to come out the sky like Rambo, taking bullets off the chest, most dispensational futurists do not believe they're in the kingdom of God right now. They actually believe that the kingdom of God is going to occur sometime at the end, right? Because they're looking at clear statements and they're saying there's absolutely no way we can be living in the kingdom of God right now, right? It just doesn't work scripturally. The partial preterist, however, and the full preterist, the inconsistent full preterist, like Dr. Don K. Preston, if you please, they believe that they are now, here and now, in the here and right now, living in the kingdom of God. They are partakers of, spiritual residents of, and they have a bunch of other, pretty little ways of explaining what they do in that kingdom. Although it seems to me that the main activity of the spiritual kingdom today is arguing with people on YouTube and being a keyboard warrior. But that's another story for another time. But the reason why I just had you hack off your old ham hock there is because Paul, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, says something pretty interesting. All right, pretty interesting. He says this, okay? Let's see. Bear with me a moment. Bear with me. Here we go. We're going to just read through it. But someone will say, now remember, he's talking about the resurrection. He's talking about the coming of Christ. He says that Christ was the first fruits. Then those who are Christ were raised at his coming. Then comes the end when he delivers the kingdom to God. Just saw my buddy Lou. And he's just going through and explaining this, right? So he says this. He says, but someone will say, how are the dead raised up? And with what body do they come? Foolish one, what you sow is not made alive unless it dies. And what you sow, you do not sow that body that shall be, but mere grain, perhaps wheat or some other grain. But God gives it a body as he pleases, and to each seed its own body. So right off the bat, we can see that Paul is trying to make the point that God is going to give it a new body, or God is going to give them a new body, right? They're going to be raised in a new body. That's the whole point. They're going to mimic the body that Jesus was raised in, that immortal, glorified, what the F body that he was raised in, that ascended up into heaven like an angel. That's what he's getting at here, okay? They're going to receive that. They're going to be like him at his coming, right? But they're waiting for that to take place. Paul goes on and says this in verse 39. All flesh is not the same, but there's one kind of flesh of men, another of animals, another of fish, another of birds. So of course we know that he's literally speaking of flesh, right? Literal flesh, because he's mentioning the flesh of birds, the flesh of beasts, whatnot. Then he goes on, he says, there are also celestial bodies and terrestrial bodies, but the glory of the celestial is one, and the glory of the terrestrial is another. There is one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, another glory of the stars, for one star differs from another star in glory. So now he's talking about heavenly bodies versus earthly bodies, right? Very, very easy, very clear. You can understand what he's talking about here as he's explaining the type of body that they're going to receive. Then he goes on, he says, so also is the resurrection of the dead. The body is sown in corruption, it's raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor, it's raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown in a natural body, it is raised in a spiritual body. There is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. And so it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Okay? Now, he goes on. He says this, however, the spiritual is not first, but the natural, and afterward the spiritual. The first man, Adam, was made of dust. The second man, the Lord, is from heaven. As was the man of dust, so also are those who are made out of dust. And as is the heavenly man, so also are those who are heavenly. Okay, he goes on, he says, and as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly man. Now, here's the point that I really want you to pay attention to, and here's why you no longer have a thigh, okay? It says this in verse 50. Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. Okay? Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. So folks, if you just hacked your thigh open and you saw flesh and you saw blood, well, I hate to break it to you, but that's your number one indicator that you are not in the kingdom of God today. And, you know, if Christians weren't such assholes half the time and didn't come on my page and try to be so sarcastic half the time, then I'd probably be a lot nicer about this. And I wouldn't be so condescending and sarcastic when I explain this to you. But because I've taken such heat from these idiots over the years, I have to be somewhat of a jerk when I rub this in, okay? You are not living in the kingdom of God today if you are flesh and blood. Plain and simple, clear as day, okay? Another quick little test that one could make is they could see what Jesus said in the Gospels about the age to come. Because remember, to a full preterist, to a partial preterist, the resurrection, the spiritual kingdom, cannot be accessed without the resurrection. So they believe that they've been resurrected in some sense, and they are now living in the spiritual kingdom, right? But they're here on earth in flesh and blood bodies, which of course doesn't work. So Jesus said that in the age to come, in the resurrection, they would neither marry nor give in marriage. They would never die again, and they'd be like angels in heaven, right? That was the indicator that would, you know, tell them that they are in the age to come. They're in the kingdom. They're in the spiritual kingdom, the heavenly city. That's the indicator, right? But instead, these guys like Drew Johnson, Keith Rhodes, Don K. Preston, Big Billy Bell, the Blunder King, they all believe that they're in the kingdom today. They're all flesh and blood. They're all married. They're all giving in marriage. They're all going to die. And they certainly all are not like angels in heaven. So they're like 0 for 20 on the test, right? They have nothing that would prove that they are in the kingdom of God today. And yet they're so certain, right? So this is the Dunning-Kruger effect. They're so certain of it. But Paul goes on after he demands and concludes that no flesh and blood can inherit the kingdom of God. It just doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work because it's a spiritual heavenly kingdom. That's what he's talking about. He just got done going over the difference between the celestial and the heavenly. I'm sorry, that's the same thing. But between the earthly and the heavenly. And his whole point working through that is that you cannot be an earthly man made of dust, made of flesh and blood, and inherit the kingdom of God. It just won't work. All right, so what has to happen in order for them to receive the kingdom of God? Anybody take a guess? Yeah, you guessed it. Here it is, very next passage. Behold, verse 51. I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruptible, and this mortal must put on immortal. So when this corruptible has put on incorruptible, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your sting? O Hades, where is your victory? And so, folks, there it is in a nutshell for you. These individuals were waiting for a twinkling of an eye, miraculous change to immortal beings. The very change that Jesus took on when he rose from the dead in his glorified body, these individuals would receive that same change. And that same change would catapult them up into the heavens where they would forever be with the Lord. They would ascend into the clouds just like Jesus did when he ascended into the clouds. They would be like him just like he was. They would have the same spiritual, celestial, heavenly body just like Jesus did. They would be immortal just like Jesus was. And that's the whole story, folks. But notice that none of them would receive that promise without receiving that twinkling of an eye, immortal, glorified change. Because flesh and blood could not inherit the kingdom of God. Okay, now, first of all, it sounds crazy, right? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't happen in real life. Just another reason why, why that is the case, where I think this is a bunch of, fairy tale type stuff. That stuff just doesn't happen. People don't change instantaneously to miraculous, angelic, never die beings. It just doesn't happen. But yeah, I mean, according to the narrative, you had to be changed before you can go into the kingdom of God. So all these people who are made of flesh and blood today, and that's literally 100% of you who are listening right now, I hate to break it to you, but you are not in the kingdom of God. Okay, you're just not. You can't be, because it's a heavenly kingdom. It's a spiritual kingdom. It's a kingdom made only for immortal beings. You're all married. Jesus said there'd be no marriage there. Yada, yada, yada. All right. And with Dante Preston's wrinkly skin and gray hair, I can certainly tell you that he is not looking like an angel in heaven these days. All right. So, come on, dude. You can turn. Just take it. Do the Portuguese pullout. The Portuguese pullout is when you just take it. You don't ask. You just take it. Wow, I almost just hit the pole. Yeah, so you can't wait for people to give you the go-ahead. You have to do the Portuguese pullout, and you have to just kind of cut in front of them. So, just take it. But anyways, yeah, so folks, hey, listen. I know it's fun to play games. I know it's fun to play make-believe and, live in the land of make-believe, in the land of pretend and all that. But it's time to grow up, all right? It's time to grow up. All signs point to you not being in the kingdom of God, okay? Now, some might say, oh, well, that didn't happen yet. Of course it happened yet. Because look when it's supposed to happen. It's happening at the coming of the Lord. It's happening. It's a twinkling of an eye change that's happening at the coming of the Lord when he comes for all those who are Christ when they're raised. That's Paul's whole point. And of course, Paul tells these ones in Corinth that we will not all die. In other words, some of you will still be left when this occurs. So unless some of those Corinthians are now 2,000 years old and they're still living over there waiting for this return, then you guys have a problem, because they're all dead. And the normal human lifespan, who knows what it was back then, but it was certainly less than 100 years. And so here's Jesus and Paul telling them that some of you will still be here, still be alive when I come, and when this happens, and when you receive these immortal glorified bodies. And so, of course, we know that it took place within the first century. And, of course, we can narrow that down to coinciding and correlating to the destruction of Jerusalem, the end of the age, the great white throne judgment where the books are open, and the inheritance of the New Jerusalem, a.k.a. the spiritual city in the heavens, a.k.a. the kingdom of God. It's quite simple, folks. This is simply the restoration of Israel's kingdom. No more pain, no more death, no more tears. The gates of the city will never be closed because there'll be no night there. All that is victory language. It's telling them that there'll never be any more threats. In the old Jerusalem, they would lock the city gates at night because enemies usually attack at night. And that's written about there. They would have to guard and defend the city by locking these massive gates that were all around the walls. And, John's basically saying, hey, there's no more gates there. The gates are staying open because there is no more night there. In other words, it's just safety language. They'd be safe. There'd be no more pain, tears, death, threat, worry, but they'd be with the Lamb wherever he goes. So, folks, that was the test. I'm sorry that you no longer have a leg. Usually the hospital can stitch that up pretty quick for you. But I appreciate you taking part in that little test just to make sure that we are indeed flesh and blood. And yeah, it just proved that we were. So, unfortunately, nobody's in the kingdom of God today. despite how bad you think you're doing something for the kingdom of God by being a keyboard thumb warrior for Christianity. So, folks, I hope you all have a great day. If you like this one, give it a like-a-rooski. It helps the channel. If not, take a hike-a-rooski. That also helps the channel. And we'll catch you on that flippity-floppity. And if I have a baby, I'll catch you a little bit down the line. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.